Welcome everyone to today's event, Data for Youth, a deep diving into COVID-19 impact on the SDG, which is being jointly hosted by Restless Development and UNDP in collaboration with the major group for children and youth under COVID-19 initiative. My name is Alice. I am based in Rwanda and I'm currently working for Restless Development as the Advocacy Manager for Education and Livelihood. And today I'm so excited to be facilitating today's discussion. Before I tell you more about the event and the brilliant speakers we have lined up, I want to briefly cover a couple of housekeeping guidelines as we move forward. To maximize our sound quality, please remain muted unless you're speaking. And please note that the event is being recorded and it is also being live streamed. We encourage you to use the chat function throughout the event to share your comments, ask questions with our speakers, and you'll find the chat icon at the bottom of your screens. I saw texting, probably you have seen it already. And do tell us through the chat feature if you haven't already, who you are and where you are joining us from. But I saw it, you've already started doing it, so well done. And there will be several opportunities for Q&A with our speakers. If you would like to ask questions, you can do this in the chat, or you can raise your virtual hand using the feature in the bottom of your screen as well. And finally, for anyone interested to stay for an extra 15 to 20 minutes at the end of the event, please feel free to stay. Our speakers and representative from UNDP and Restless Development will remain with us to provide an opportunity for networking and further discussion. So right, enough for housekeeping. Let's tune to today's event. I hope everyone here in this call agrees with me that youth are critical agents for change and for the sustainable development as recognized in the 2030 agenda, and that our knowledge and innovative solutions are ultimately essential for implementation and monitoring of the sustainable development goals. But despite our agency, and there are many young people, our peers, who continue to face multiple interlocked forms of discrimination and exclusion for decision-making processes and development processes. And they're at risk of being left behind. And we have seen an impact of global pandemic and growing climate crisis are further exploiting inequalities and challenging progresses toward the achievement of the SDGs. So faced with these ongoing threats and the challenges, I would argue that it's more crucial than ever that young people are listened to and supported to drive forward a more just and sustainable future. So today, we'll be hearing more about the crucial role of youth in data collection, analysis, and we ensure that the most marginalized are not being excluded from the data set that can inform crucial processes and policies at local, national, and global level. In today's session, we will also be hearing from UNDP, who have recently launched some cutting-edge research that assess the impact of COVID-19 on the Sustainable Development Goals by mapping out 3 potential recovery scenarios in 2030 and 2050, capturing the multidimensional effect of the pandemic, viable pathways, and credible policies options for the SDG progress over the next decade. But I'm not going to tell you any more about this because we have our experts from UNDP who will be taking some time in a moment to walk through this study and their powerful new COVID-19 data futures platform that we hope you could really benefit from. The tool could benefit many of you joining us here. I know I took much of the time, but I want to introduce our wonderful speakers who will be leading us in this discussion. And I would ask our speakers if you could just give us a wave when I introduce you, that would be great. I would like to start by introducing Prathit, who is a youth advisor for the COVID-19 initiative, and we'll be kicking us off with a spark talk to share more on issues around data collection and access. Hope you could see Prathit. And then we then have Laurel Peterson, the head of strategy integration with the UNDP, who will be sharing more information on the study that assesses the impact of COVID-19 on the sustainable development. And next, I'm delighted to introduce you to Babatunde Abidoye, who is the Global Policy Advisor with UNDP. Babatunde and I will be walking through some of the COVID-19 data future platform features together, and I'm excited to navigate it, navigate the platform with him, and hope everyone will be learning throughout the way. And a warm welcome to Daniel from International Youth Watch, who will be sharing some of the reflections, Daniel, and along with Prathit on the study and the platform, drawing on their excellent insight and experiences, their experience leading data collection work with other young people around the world. Then finally, Laurel and I will be joined by Noella Richards, Noella, who is the youth specialist with the NDP, to share the closing reflections with us. So wow, what a lined up. So I'm so excited and I'm really looking forward to this wonderful discussion. And without further ado, allow me to welcome Prathit. Prathit, I would love us to open this discussion with your wonderful spark talk. So over to you, Prathit.
Thank you so much, Alice. Namaste to everyone. I'm Prathit, and it's a pleasure to be here today on this event. I'd like to say that we're living in a world which has been paralyzed by a pandemic, where our growth has been impacted unimaginably, and our path towards sustainable development has been riled up with inequalities, with impunity, and of course, poverty. At this time, it is very important for for leaders around the world, for heads of states around the world, to think of a plan, a decisive and an inclusive plan to build back better. And we also need to note that the pandemic has gravely impacted young people and children around the world. And thus, we also keep in mind that young people and children are backbones to any project which aims for a post-pandemic sustainable world. And that is why we need to keep in mind that it is very important at this point to include children and young people in decision making. In today's world, what is happening around the world is that even though young people are involved in decision making, children, which we define in international law as any human being under the age of 18, often feel left out of the process of decision making when it comes to governments. Opinion, voices, and experiences of children matter the most at a time when we are looking towards a sustainable and a development world. And it is so because we need to realize that the cradle to humanity is with children. And it is with respect to rights of children that we can think of building back better. If we look into international law, Article 12 of the United Nations Convention on Rights of Child mandates the governments to take into account opinions and advice from children when it comes to taking decision in terms of their well-being, children's well-being, when it comes to making policies and that. However, this has not been the case throughout the pandemic. I find it relevant to quote a child participant from the COVID under 19 survey, which recorded the experiences of children throughout the world in the COVID-19 pandemic. The 17-year-old girl said that in order to protect our rights, our voices have to be heard and taken seriously. Make our voices your choices. If we envision to build back better and fly towards sustainable development, let's also remember what the former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan famously said. He said that without good data, we are flying blind. And that is why it is all the more important if we are envisioning a world, a future world where we include rights of children and young people in our plan for building back better. It is important for us to involve children in the process of data and its aggregation. So if we are looking towards a world which is sustainable and which is developing, we have to involve governments, data practitioners, NGOs, civil societies, need to be committed to involving children in the process of data collection and analysis. and to make sure that children's right to be heard and development is secured to them. As a practice, I would like to highlight the COVID-19 initiative, which has been remarkable in terms of recording experiences of children during the pandemic in the form of data. The COVID-19 survey, which the Queen's University Belfast developed the design and analysis of the survey involving children and partners as a part of the innovative approach to child rights-based research as developed by Center for Children's Rights. That survey was taken up by 26,000 plus children from 137 countries. And it was remarkable not just in making sure that data from children's experiences is made out and their right to be heard is secured, but also involving children in creation of the survey itself, as well as to develop capacities among children so that they are able to interpret that data and understand what has been going around among children around the world. And I would like to quote some particular data which came out of the survey of COVID-19. Out of all the children who took up the survey, which was around 26,000 plus, only a mere 20% of children felt that governments around the world took into account their opinions while making decisions pertaining to them. What was more alarming was that among children with disabilities who took up the survey, 48% were most critical of government's response during the pandemic towards children. Further, the children belonging to the LGBTQI plus community who took the survey, only 51% of children were critical of the government's response during the pandemic, which pertained to them. This just shows to go on how children's voices were not taken into account when it comes to a time like a crisis of a pandemic. What is more alarming is that the disproportionate response that this pandemic had among children and young people. As we see from the survey, 62% of children in detention centers, refugee camps, and homeless centers said that they hardly have any access to internet at a time when the whole world moved virtual. Further, 40% of asylum-seeking children said that they had lesser access to food during the time of pandemic, and 38% of children from migrant communities said the same. All this goes on to show how governments haven't been as responsive in terms of taking into account rights of children and young people during a pandemic. And that is all the more why we need a data-based approach where governments are directed by the data when it comes to making policy decisions and hearing out the voices of children. If we are to move towards a world which respects the Sustainable Development Goal targets, I, as a member of the Youth Advisory Committee of COVID-19, call upon the governments to take into account the data and experiences of children during the pandemic when it comes to developing responses in terms of policies and decisions. I also call upon data practitioners to develop child-friendly child rights-based approach in terms of taking responses from children and recording their experiences. I also call upon the NGOs and civil societies to reflect on these models and to make sure that data is collected in a child-friendly way. We need to remember that we are standing at a very crucial point in history where we are envisioning to collectively recover from the pandemic. And at this point, it is very important to remember what Nelson Mandela said, that history will remember us. History will judge us by the difference we make in the everyday lives of children. Thank you.
Great. The voices of children and young people matters the most. Thank you so much, Prathit. That has raised some really important issues that we need to focus on in this conversation. So thank you so much. And yeah, we delivered a wonderful talk. And now I want to invite Laurel, who is the head of SDG integration at the UNDP, to talk more on this recent study I was mentioning about in the beginning. I told you that I'm not an expert, but Laurel is going to tell us more on what it's all about. So over to you, Laurel.
Alice, thank you so much. And Prathit, thank you so much too. Really inspiring and right on. And it's a perfect way to lead into what I'd like to do in the few minutes that I'm going to be presenting this study. We want to put the power of data in your hands. And we want to be able to support you to make the strongest messages and to make the strongest influence that you can in terms of the policy levers that are going to lead to a future that is more just, more equitable, more sustainable than what we have now. And often when we think about data, at least at the UN, when we think about data, we think about data for reporting. So how do I describe what's happened? How do I count how many people? I said I would reach X communities. Did I reach X communities? Whatever. But we're not always using data that we need to imagine the future. What are future possibilities? And there's no one possibility. There's several. So we all want to be able to interrogate and investigate those options in a way that makes sense for us, from our context, from our viewpoint, and so on. So what we're doing in this platform and what we've done with this study is we've created data-driven scenarios of the way that the future could play out as a result of COVID. And we've interrogated those. It gives you an opportunity, we hope, and we'll get into the details of this as we go, to make those arguments in your countries, for your constituencies and your partners, for the issues that are most important to you. I'm going to say a word or two about scenarios because any scenario is as valuable as the people who create it. And to the point that Prathit has made, make our voices, the voices of children and young people, your choices. So I would be open to us challenging us back to say, these scenarios are interesting. If I was going to develop a scenario, this is what I would put in front. I would want to know more about this or that. There's some issues here that are good. There's others that are missing. And that would be my voice in a forward-looking scenario. So I'm going to present what we've got. The idea of the conversation, and Babatunde is going to walk through what we can do on this platform, is to get your contribution into this. What are we missing? What else would you need to make the argument in your context for a recovery from COVID that's just and that's fair? And I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to bring up a presentation that is not boring, I hope. Okay, so it's not. So don't worry. I won't try to kill you with PowerPoint. I'll try to inspire you with Visme. But basically, what I wanted to do is easier to show you a couple of slides to talk about what this study is and where we think there's an opportunity for you and why we did this in the first place. So we created this study as part of a flagship initiative last year. And this is where we were seeing this tremendous threat that COVID was causing to development across the board. And we had a lot of statistics that were telling us for the first time that human development was going to decline across the board. We have found through the study that we have done that 8 out of the 10 people that are pushed into poverty as a result of the pandemic are in the countries at the lowest end of the human development spectrum. And this matters because even last year, a lot of the impact in terms of caseload, in terms of deaths, it was happening in wealthier countries. But the impact, and we've seen this play out, and we're going to continue to see this, but the impact and the fallout is in the poorest countries. And the data helps us make this case clearly. It helps us articulate that, and it helps us get beyond big global aggregates and figures to the details of what that means in particular regions, in particular countries, for particular communities. This is what we want to, this is the conversation that we want to be able to open with data and be able to use a futures model approach that helps us design for an uncertain future and an uncertain world. And this was to my point earlier that we don't, there's no, we're trying to work certainly in UNDP and in the work we're doing in the integration team in systems. And if you're going to do that effectively, there's no linear pathway. We're not trying to get anywhere. There's no journey, right? There's experiences, there's opportunities, there's options. And we want to be able to pursue the ones that best meet our values and our goals, what we want for ourselves and for our futures. And so that's what these scenarios let us do. This is an open source, so you can find out more about the particular model that we've used. You see the logo up at the top of the Party Center for International Futures. You can go and check out more of what's possible here. But again, it helps us interrogate evidence-based options, see what could work best in different contexts. And sometimes the results really surprise us. We've undertaken some of this work in different countries where policymakers have said, I want to see a pathway that increases GDP and lowers poverty the most. And we came up with a bunch of different scenarios. And in this particular country context, the scenario that had the biggest impact to boost GDP and reduce poverty was a scenario that we had called the women empowerment, the gender equality model, because what we found in that context was creating more opportunities for women to be part of the formal labor force, it increased GDP and it decreased poverty. And if we had have come up with that without an evidence base, if we had have said, no, we think that women's empowerment is the way forward, this is what it is, it's less persuasive and it's less detailed. And it's not as easy for you to be able to target the policy interventions and the choices without having the data that's underpinning some of this. So it's just to give you a sense of what international futures as a model could do, how we've used it before. And in this particular study, we put together a couple of scenarios. A baseline scenario, which sort of plays out the experience that we've seen in COVID over the course of the last year or so. A high damage scenario where the recovery is slower, it's protracted, the economic damage is worse. That's the high damage. And then an SDG push scenario where we said, even taking COVID into account, so taking into account what we've already experienced, what would it take? What would the choices look like that would actually lead to a future that doesn't get us back to where we were before? Nobody wants to go back to the pathways of 2019. We were off track. So what is the pathway that succeeds, that goes beyond that? And this is what we'll tell you a little bit about in the SDG push scenario. But what you can see from this graphic, first, a couple of things that you'll see. We're looking at the data not only to 2030, but all the way to 2050. One of the things that you'll also see in this graph is that the rate of progress of the SDG push actually accelerates dramatically. This is showing you poverty reductions between 2030 and 2050. So one of the things this tells us of many is that the investments that we make today, they do take time. They go beyond political cycles of any government, and they really start to accelerate when investments have had an opportunity to take root. So it's just to say we do need to, we say this, but the data also shows us we've got to be thinking about the longer term, not because we're waiting for 2050, but because the choices that we make today impact where we're going to be in 2050. So it's really, really important, the action today that can maximize those benefits. And the SDG push scenario looks like this. We came up with 48 different parameters of different choices when they take place together in a country, then produce these significant results in terms of poverty eradication and progress towards a fair and a sustainable future. And Anna will go with Babatunde in a minute through the Data Futures platform, and you can take a look at this in more detail. But you, in any case, can look around any of these parameters and see what we're thinking about in terms of what we think it would take, right, for that future state, which is more fair and more sustainable. And what I would be really interested in, and this is a conversation I would love to pick up with many of you over the course of the next weeks and months, what's missing from here, or what's underestimated? Where are the parameters on? You agree with it? And what are we not covering here that you think is really key for that future state? And then we create another scenario. This is the great thing about scenarios, right? Is that you never would want only one of them. You want several so that you can really start to weigh options and considerations before you're identifying pathways or making investments in different choices. So this is to give you a sense of what underpins our study. And these are the 48 parameters. You can take a closer look at that as we go ahead. And so what did we find? Does it make any difference at all? Well, from the perspective of the high damage scenario, it's not good. We could see by 2030, 1 billion people in poverty. And of those 1 billion people in poverty, 250 million, so 250 million will be in poverty as a direct result of COVID. So that's 250 million people impacted today and last year that are still in poverty 10 years later. And you can imagine what that would mean, that experience of poverty for that long a period of time for young people, for educational attainment, for job opportunities, for so many other things that even in this data, we aren't getting into all of those details here. But equally, not only for doom and gloom, the SDG push scenario could lift, if we made those investments, 146 million people out of poverty by 2030. And that's considerable. That's ahead of where we would have been in 2019. And it's demonstrating with evidence that the choices that we make can have that transformational impact in 2030. We took a deeper look at what this means for countries at the lowest end of the human development spectrum. And here we said, does it still play out the same? When we look at countries in the lower and medium human development groups, what is the impact of these scenarios for them? And we found that the SDG Push scenario, it holds. The impact is considerable for those countries. And you could see 100 million people lifted out of poverty by 2030 as a result in those countries of the choices around that SDG Push scenario. And then there's a little bit of additional data here. I won't go into all of it because we can do that with Babatunde in the next section. But again, for the point of value and having this sort of evidence base behind the arguments that we want to make for certain policy choices and changes, you start to see how the countries that are the furthest behind could actually increase the rate of poverty eradication faster. A couple of other stats just to give you a sense of what this looks like in those countries where we would be most concerned of them being left behind. So 16 countries could gain more than 5 years in terms of poverty reduction. And from the perspective of making a case and making the argument in your context and understanding these different policy issues, one of the things we wanted to do with this study is also present the years that you can gain. That's why we framed in this particular way. So what do you gain when you make these choices in terms of poverty eradication? And the last or so points I wanted to come to is what countries can achieve in terms of SDG targets that they wouldn't have otherwise if it wasn't for the SDG push. And remember that SDG push scenario is factoring in COVID impact. So this isn't building on a pre-COVID world, this is building on the COVID experience. So you see more countries that could meet the extreme poverty target, more countries that could eradicate malnutrition, more countries that could achieve the target for safe water, but look one level below to 2050. And as I was saying, this is where you see even higher benefits of return in terms of extreme poverty, malnutrition, and safe water. So I think for all of you who are also thinking about the future with maybe a longer time horizon than most policymakers, it's really important that we aren't only thinking to 2030, we're thinking to 2050, we're thinking beyond. What feels like short term, I mean, 2030 in many ways feels like it's something that's just around the corner. So what we wanted to show you here, this is what it looks like when you go into the data future space. And Babatunde will go through this in more details. This study isn't the only thing on the space. What we're trying to do is bring different kinds of simulations, different kinds of futures modeling and scenarios, different information that's related to people's perceptions. So we have a survey that was done for the 75th anniversary of the UN. It has a lot of perceptions from people around the world, and it has different analysis on dialogues that have been held so that you can help make the strongest case or interrogate an issue in a way that's going to be valuable in your context. Maybe it's more persuasive to present survey data back to your constituencies and so on to make the case. This is what people really think. And maybe it's valuable when you can say, that's also what the evidence tells us, right? These are the kinds of policy choices that make a difference, and then play it forward, as I said, to 2030 and 2050. So we really want this to be a space for thought experimentation. We want this to be a space that's also not only built on quantitative data, but evidence that comes through stories, evidence that comes through your experience, evidence that comes through emotions, evidence that comes through history, you know, other ways that we start to bring together quantitative data, qualitative insights so that we're driving change, the change that we want to see, and that's really in all of your hands. So I'm going to leave it at this for now, and then hopefully with Alice and Baba, we can get into more of the details. Thank you all. If we haven't popped into the chat our email address, let's pop it in, colleagues, because we'd really love to hear from all of you and keep this conversation going. Thank you. Thank you, Alice.
Yeah, that was insightful, Roro. I really enjoyed getting to learn more about the study, and yeah, I hope everyone here really want to explore more on this platform and what it is, and that's why now I'm going to ask Babatunde. Let's come to this platform. Let's do a little walkthrough of this platform as we help the participants to understand what it is and how they could how they could use it eventually. So if you could join me and possibly have a conversation on this platform, that would be fantastic.
Thank you, Alice.
Great. So I want to understand. I have a couple of questions in terms of this platform and how it works. But also we'll get some of the questions, a few questions from the participants. But I have a question that I want to ask, and but feel free to also jump in the chat box and ask questions. We could address a few after having this conversation. I would maybe Babatun, if I want to I have a question. For example, if what do I have to know about this platform in terms of maybe can I explore an impact on SDG on this platform? If I want to explore an impact, where do I go? What do I do?
Yeah, thanks, Alice. Just to quickly introduce the platform. So this is the UNDP Data Features platform, and that we put together last year. It was launched December last year. The goal is to bring in data from different partner agencies, different organizations, right, and be able to start to put together insights and explanation based on that data, right? So it's not just the data, but also insights that you can see here. And we'll talk about a couple of those insights, which is the impact of COVID on the SDGs. But you can also access all the data. So you can go here, if I click on this, I can access all the data that we have on the platform. You can make correlation, you can interact with it, and also be able to download it. It makes it a lot easier for many of us that might be trying to do research at the university or do a bachelor's or master's degree. If I want to pull all the data into one space, and you can filter by country, you can filter by region, and you can download everything, which makes it easier to do. So for the impact of COVID on the SDGs, it's under the insights, and you can go under insights and you'll see different insights there, and then you can navigate to assessing COVID impact on the SDGs and just click on that.
Great. That sounds easy to do and to navigate as long as you have a computer and internet to browse. And how about comparing the impact in two countries? For example, I want to compare the impact of maybe Kenya and any country in the US. How do I do it?
Right. So we've been able to. What we have here is, okay, let me start from here. So you can, I know Laura talked about this earlier in terms of the interventions. But what we have, for instance, is the different indicators on the impact of COVID, right, on the SDGs, and then you can select your country. So you said Kenya, if I want to go to Kenya, I scroll down and then I find Kenya, then I click on that. Then it's going to show me what it is for Kenya. But it's based on those different scenarios. And if I just want to see the impact alone, right, I can uncheck this, right, and just see the impact of COVID. But in terms of comparing countries, if you scroll down here, for instance, I can easily do this country comparison. Right? So I can select multiple countries. Here, I've selected different country groupings like low-income countries, medium HDI countries, but I can uncheck that and only select Kenya. Here we have Kenya. I can say I want to compare Kenya with another country, let's say Liberia or Lesotho, right? And then I apply that, and this is showing poverty rates for the two countries and how COVID impacts them. So I can see Kenya here. If I remove the SDG push, it's showing what the impact is. Or I can change it to the number of people to be able to see how that is differently.
Wow, that really it looks fun to do it and getting the data in the real time. So yeah, how about Laura talked a little bit on the scenarios and what about SDG push scenarios? How can I see how it could advance the SDG in my country? Sort of how can I know about it?
Yes, so what we modeled, as Laura mentioned, is in the SDG Push Scenario, the 4 areas that we looked at. So governance is one of it, green economy is one of it, social protection, and digital disruption. So this is on the, if you go to that link, this is displayed in the first part of the intervention. So for instance, on the digital disruption, if you want to see what we modeled there and the assumption that we made, you can just over on this, for instance, it's showing that we said there's a target 5% annual increase in lower secondary graduation starting in 2021, for instance, right? There are other assumptions there that you can look at in terms of access to broadband. And we are all saying that, okay, what happens if governments invest in broadband, for instance, right? How would that lead to a different pathway on the SDGs, same for education and the rest? And what we're hoping for with this conversation with you and other colleagues, youth today, is that you look at these parameters and assumptions that we made, and feel free to interrogate it and say, oh, for my country, this should be higher, right? This, we want to dream bigger than this, and say, okay, let's think together how to look at it.
Yeah, that's quite understandable. And but then I'm curious on to know more about the different policy choices in SDG Push. Where can I check that? Is it possible to see it on the platform?
Yes, so this so the policy choices are, you can reach out to us on some of those, but you can also look at this based on this wheel that I showed here. There's also the link to the publication that Katarina put earlier in the chat. So there's a detailed report that shows all the assumptions and all the modeling aspect, and you can look at it then.
Great. I think possibly many of the young people here, or even the participants here who are attending this wonderful event, they think they could suggest additional policy choices or promising practices that we think probably they could work better. Can they get in touch in terms of maybe reaching out to UNDP, or how can they get involved or get in touch with the team?
Yes, thanks. So part of what we've been doing is training people on how to use international features, right? And also discussions around this modeling itself. So our email address, it's data@undp.org, and we also have, you can also reach us directly, and be happy to have conversation around this. A big part of this work, as you know, is understanding how to accelerate the SDGs, and part of that conversation will happen at a national level, and on interrogating the different investments that governments are making. So Prathit mentioned some of that earlier on how we want different set of investment and choices at the national level. And models like this help us to start to interrogate and see how that will lead us into a different pathway.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and that's really helpful. I have maybe a final one before we take 2 to 3 questions from the participants who might have a question regarding this particular platform, because we have another session where we get the time to ask questions to the speakers. But for this, we take the quick questions on the platform. But I want to, maybe for those that want to dive deeper into this international future model, can they access it online?
Yes, and I'm trying to show here. We have a Spark Blue that we use in UNDP and support the other UN organizations. So if you go to sparkblue.org/eves-FAQ-19, there's different FAQs on the international features itself and how to download the model and where to look at, and the way we've been able to use this for the impact of COVID on the SDGs. And we'll put it on also in the chat for people to be able to see. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Babatunde. That was very informative. I think I've learned a lot in terms of navigating through this platform. I think at my own time, I'll take time to do this more. So now we can take a couple of questions, quick questions from the participants. If you want to ask a question, you can either type it or raise your virtual hand so that you can ask a direct question too. Yeah, I see Al Hassan.
Hello.
Hi.
I want to ask, I'm Al Hassan, calling from Ghana, Executive Director, Youth Frontiers Ghana. I want to know if some of these materials can be made available to some of us so that we'll be able to digest it better. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, Babatunde, do you want to take it?
Sure, yes. We have our SDG integration website that has a lot of detail on the work that we do and the publications, including other work related to addressing the SDGs and how to digest this. There's also some other information on Data Features platform that you can also have a look at. So we'll put all of that in the chat, and it will be easier for you to go through it.
Thank you.
Great. We're going to have one more question before we go into the next session, because as I told you, we have another longer Q&A. Could go with James.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to ask this question. Now, as we all know that health is a precondition of economic activities, and the economy can stop because of a health issue and lack of preparedness. This is also a lesson that the continent's partners can take to cognizance of the risk or the health issues that arise from health issues. So it simply means that the government needs to invest in health and in what allows people to live longer. So as SDGs, how can we take note on the same issue?
Great. Babatunde, you can take it as well. Yeah.
No, thanks, James. You made an excellent point on health and how the pandemic taught us a lot of things, right? So a lot of us did not imagine that we will be locked in with a lockdown for multiple months, since COVID started, right? So a lot of the discussions and part of why we did the studies around what if we were better prepared, right? What if we had achieved the SDGs before the pandemic started? What if people had access to water? What if people had access to internet? What if people had access to proper educational system at the national level that can prepare them to be able to withstand the lockdown effectively, right? So, which is part of why we're looking at this SDG Push Scenario to start to say, okay, let's make this investment now, because the SDGs itself is important for us to be able to reduce the risk and the impact of things like pandemics and healthcare, as you mentioned it. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Babatunde, and everyone who participated in this very brief Q&A. We get more time to have a deeper Q&A session, but at least I think we just covered a few questions now. And I want to open up a reflection moment, and I want to open up to Daniel and Prathit. on, I want to hear their reflections on what they have heard and to share further insights from their own experiences and work. Daniel, I want to start with you. Please do let us know, share with us your reflections on this.
Thank you, Alice. Can you hear me?
Yes.
That's amazing. It's always a challenge online. I'm Daniel Calarco from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. It's such a pleasure to be here with all these bright minds to discuss the COVID-19 recovery, youth, data, and how we can create new realities of inclusion, peace, and sustainable development. I'm the founder of the International Youth Watch, the Observatório Internacional da Juventude in Portuguese, and I'm also a global ambassador for the UNDP program Generation 17 and one of the youth researchers at Restless Development. So I can say that I'm here among friends and so good to see so many familiar faces. The leading question of my contribution is how can countries at the risk of being left behind build forward from COVID-19? And there is no easy answer to this question. But I can say for sure, after working for months, I can say years with youth policies, sustainable development, peace and justice, that young people and the youth perspectives are at the center of those solutions, of the solutions we need. It's amazing to come here to see these UNDP laudable efforts to create scenarios and make sure that different data and information are included to avoid the high damage scenario and make sure that we can go pursue the SDG Push Scenario. But it does require a lot of effort, commitment, political will, and investments. In my country, in Brazil, and also across the globe, the COVID-19 spotlighted the inequalities we face. We have to open a discussion about social inclusion, peace, justice, and every single one of the 17 goals. And to do so, governments need to be supportive and acknowledge the role of young people in the process of creating social change. In Brazil and in the region, during the COVID-19 pandemic, not only the SDG 3 about healthy and well-being was impacted. Measures of social distancing make youth vulnerable for police brutality and state violence in favelas in Rio de Janeiro. The need for social distance also prevented, due to the digital divide, the access to internet and to keep engaged in online activities for education. Also, the quarantine itself became a real Sophie's choice for youth from marginalized groups, that they had to choose between staying home but and safe from the virus, but without money, or going out for work to fulfill basic needs, but being exposed. But we have to keep in mind that we are impacted by the problems. Mostly of the time, disproportionately impacted if you consider intersectionality. But we are part of the solution. Young people across the globe desire change, and we also wanted to help decision makers to go beyond recovery towards 2030, helping them to manage complexity and uncertainty. And we want to discuss not youth policies alone, but also governance, digital disruption, green recovery, and social participation, that are the 4 key pillars of the UNDP report on COVID-19 recovery. And I can say also that youth perspectives can provide valuable insights to all the 48 parameters created by the UNDP. As the head of the International Youth Watch and one of the Restless Development researchers at the Resilient Realities Program, I had the chance to deep dive on how youth from favelas in Rio de Janeiro will experience the response to COVID-19 pandemic. And I can say that we changed the game. We challenged the narrative. We were able to stand up and fulfill the gap left by formal institutions to protect our community. And we were resilient, collaborative, and focusing on looking beyond. We create new realities from denial to effective responses, and from exclusion to hope. We care to one another, we listen close, we pay attention, and we start to create data that was inclusive and participatory. Youth got together from different communities in self-organized spaces called crisis cabinets. Cabinets that would provide responses to the basic needs, would mapping needs, understanding the economic situation of families, would also organize donations, share accurate information on how to prevent the COVID spread, distribute hand gels, food baskets. We are talking about thousands of donations mobilized and led by young people. And all this process was data-driven. So despite not being experts on data or not even having literacy at school, young people knew that data would mean life in that situation. And they needed to get the information about themselves and our communities to understand how to allocate very scarce resources. And our effort and experiences are very valuable to create a resilient recovery from the COVID-19 and make sure that we achieve the SDG Push scenario. Community data, information, and community-centered knowledge led by young people has a huge potential to guide public policy based on social participatory diagnosis and to make sure that we have a sustainable territorial development. So my final recommendations would be that governments need to be supportive of local data collections and validate local knowledge. We need to make youth real stakeholders in the process of taking the decisions and creating the recovery we need. We need to create protocols, to create safeguards, and make sure that our voices are heard and we have a seat at the table. We have also to make sure that we address the structural vulnerability of young people, mainly for intersectional groups. And my recommendations for all those brilliant young leaders that are here online, taking the time to discuss the COVID-19 recovery, having a look on the COVID-19 reports that's amazing, launched by UNDP and the platform of modeling futures, that they keep being brave, being a leader, and never underestimating the power of data, narrative, and trajectory on creating the changes we need. And also ask everyone to stay tuned and connected, having a look on the platform, having a look on the report, and be waiting, because very soon Restless and myself, Restless, and all the partners are going to launch a civil society report on unequal data and evidence, where we're going to share more and more information about how our voices matters, how our lives matters, and how we need to create inclusive data in order to create inclusive and resilient solutions. Thank you so much, Alice, and thank you so much for everyone for hearing me.
Great. Thank you so much, Daniel. I agree with you. We changed the narrative and we are resilient. Thank you so much, Daniel. Do you want to share your reflections?
Absolutely. I think that reflecting on the platform, firstly, on what the Futures Development Platform stood for, which we just went through. As a young person and as an advocate for rights of children, I feel that it's a really important tool for governments around the world to center their policies around data, which is relevant in this world of sustainable development. And I also feel that particular insights through the platform, such as children's involvement in education and closure of schools, which is which I found of particular importance when it comes to respecting rights of children and developing a data set for governments to build their policies around. I also feel, and I look forward in future for a platform as such, which is inclusive of young people's experiences, children's experiences during the time of a pandemic, because it is experiences also that matters when it comes to deciding policies and framing policies of the government, as I had illustrated by presenting the findings from the COVID-19 survey. And besides that, I also feel that this is not just a tool for the governments to look upon, but also a tool for young people to advocate on the basis of the data that we have at hand. Because we also need to remember that today young people have an additional responsibility. As we saw the pandemic and how it disproportionately affected the population. And here's where the role of young people comes in. It is when the voice to the voiceless is given by young people in the society that we can move towards a larger change. We are living in a world where there's a lot of disproportionality and intergenerational connect from young people to children, from young people to other young people who want to voice themselves but are not being able to. That is very important for the youth of everywhere around the world to step up their efforts when it comes to realizing of the Sustainable Development Goals. It is only when we establish a peer-to-peer connect, an intergenerational connect, that we can move to a more rights inclusive and a sustainable world. Without having we are moving towards a world where we respect an inclusiveness, we respect a progressiveness, and that is where the role of young people come in. Because if we are to move towards such a sustainable world where there is inclusiveness and sustainability, it is young people who would lead it, and they would do so by having a connection, an intergenerational connection, and a peer connection with others who are not being able to voice themselves. It is time that youth take up the responsibility of making the voices of the unheard heard before the world forums. And that is where we can step towards a change. Of course, at COVID-19, we have been focusing on advocacy around the data that we have concentrated on for so long, and how the experiences of children of the pandemic, which have been recorded, to advocate on the basis of that data has been a primary role that COVID-19 has been playing right now. And involving children and young people in this advocacy is also important. And of course, we're coming up with more interesting ways of taking this forward, taking the data forward nationally and internationally. And those of you who are interested in our work could follow our social spaces to know what we're doing in the future when it comes to including young people and children in terms of speaking for the rights of those who have been unheard, of those who have been disproportionately affected during the pandemic, and of those for moving towards the world which is inclusive and composite of everyone. Thank you.
What a wonderful reflection. Thank you so much, Prathit. And now I want us, before we go into the main Q&A, the bigger Q&A I promised you, I want us to do to address we have some of the poll questions, and we want to hear from you. If you could have the poll questions and then you could take the time to answer them. The first question, in 10 years' time, do you think our generation would be highly damaged? Scenario: achieve SDG push, maintain status quo. Please do answer the questions. And great. Okay. Yeah. Please do answer the poll so that we could hear from you all, and we engage you in this conversation. We want to hear from you. Okay. Yeah. Great. This is the result is skewed on that in the 10 years time. Do you think our generation would achieve SDG push? That's what it stood out to you most, with the 40% of respondents agreed on that. And if we could have the second question, please. How would you describe your data usage? How would you describe your data usage? I'm a heavy data user. I'm comfortable using data when I need to. I use data when I can, but it's sometimes tricky to wrap my head around. I like the idea of data, but I don't use that much in practice. It's wonderful insights. Okay. Great. Cool. I'm comfortable using data when I need to. Wow, that's a good one. And thanks for participating. And for the other questions, we want you to to respond in the chat box. We not be making the multiple choice, but rather we're going to please chat your answer in the chat box. And then the third question is, there are many ways to reduce poverty and inequality. We can't make progress on the 2030 agenda without prioritizing. If you could complete that. Okay, thanks, Katharina. I saw the question in the chat. There are many ways to reduce poverty and inequalities. We can't make without youth leadership, sustainable development, innovation, inclusivity, gender equality, systemic change, education, youth empowerment, universal access to education. Wow. Meaningful youth engagement, a good one. Social justice, empowerment. Wow. We're getting some great insights. And then the last question before we take a couple of questions from you is, how would you describe the role young people play in SDG implementation, monitoring and accountability? Please type in the touch. I think Katarina has already put it in the, mentioned it in the chat. How would you describe the role young people play in SDG implementation, monitoring and accountability? Okay. I see you need more involvement of children and youth. Essential. Somebody talked about technology. Passive at the moment. Young people have more incentive to think of the long term and the future, and they're recognized. Very integral, though lacking, fundamental. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for participating in this poll. I think we, keep them coming. We'll be, we're really getting some wonderful insights from you, and we value your participation and engagement in this whole process. And now we're going to take, a couple questions from the participants, but then because we don't have enough time, we're going to open questions for 10 to 15 minutes discussion, and at this time you can either type your question in the chat or raise your virtual hand as we did in the brief Q&A. But we might not have the time to get through all the questions now, but any question asked over the chat will be shared with the speakers so that they can respond after the event in the follow-up communique. But if you have a question, we'll be happy to feel free to address the questions to any of the speakers, and we're going to take maximum of 4 questions so that we could go to the last part. Okay, I see Alfu, do you want to ask a question?
Thank you, Alice. Thank you for the wonderful presenter to sharing your wonderful things you did. My question is, this is really important to sharing the data regarding the COVID-19. Is there any plan for you to make the multilingual thing for this data? Because sometimes we often want to empower the young people, but due to the language, it's a barrier still. So considering this fact, do you have any plan to make the multilingual brief or multilingual things to access this data in different languages?
Roro, do you want to take it?
Yes, we have plans to do that, but we just launched a platform, and now we're trying to get to the point where we can translate a lot of the things on the platform to multiple languages. But yes, we have a lot of plans for that.
Great. And then let's hear from Chidif Tos. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name.
My full name is Haidefos, and I am a Greek accountant. Can I consign somewhere my ideas, my solutions about a lot of problems, global problems? Can I have an email, maybe, to consign my articles? Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes. Could you repeat again the question, please?
I have read some articles which confront the poverty and criminality on a global level. I want to consign them somewhere. Is it possible?
Okay. Do you have somebody wants to address that question?
Let me try. And thanks for the question. And if I'm understanding the question, you're looking for the places where you can share
Yes.
some of these ideas that you have. What we can do on Data Futures, first of all, reach out. So you see the data at undp.org. So we can open a discussion. The idea for Data Futures is that you can test some of them. So if you have a particular perspective on a particular country and you want to use data to understand, is this going to be the best is this going to be the best solution? Can this have the most impact? Then you can work through a series of the simulations that we have to test out some of those ideas and see if, in fact, when you put the data to work, does it still suggest that those solutions are going to have the most impact? So I would say see Data Futures as this place where you can test, where you can stress test and you can consider different options, different combinations of data might give you different insights. So that's really how we're seeing this space as well. But I would say otherwise, yeah, Nudara just put in the chat, reach out to us. You see the two email addresses there also.
Yeah, I think we could take one question from the chat box from Julia Square. Asked that what's your strategy to fully engage young people in SDG implementation as of now in times of COVID-19 situation?
Noelia, that might be a good one for you as our lead.
Okay, I was trying to retrieve the question on the chat. Hi, everyone. Can you just reread it again, Alice?
Definitely, yeah. What's your strategy to fully engage young people in SDG implementation as of now in times of COVID-19 situation?
Yes, so I mean, obviously we would need more than 30 seconds to describe the full strategy, but obviously there are different steps that are being taken. As you know, UNDP is a very decentralized organization, and a number of country offices may have, for instance, a youth sounding board, or a youth mechanism to systematically engage with youth constituencies or children and youth constituencies around SDG prioritization, planning, around implementation, or as part of specific projects. At the global level, I mean, we also have a number of platforms to support, for instance, the role of youth in the implementation, in monitoring, in SDG-related accountability, specifically on the role that SDG 16, that young people play in SDG 16 in particular, in building peaceful, just and inclusive societies. I can type up a number of references in the chat, but happy to have a conversation separately as well. There is a United Nations Youth Strategy, which is identifying a number of thematic priorities, but also has the amplification of youth voices at the core as a cross-cutting pillar as well. And we also do a lot of work related to crisis context, in particular in the context of the COVID-19 response, but also in the context of peace building. And I typed in particular one reference for your info, supporting on how we support young people throughout the program cycle and the project cycle in the context of peace building in particular. But yeah, happy to engage with you separately as well. We have a number of initiatives going on, and the SparkBlue page, sparkblue.org/youth, can give you a lot of information and insights specifically on your country or your region or at the global level.
Thanks, Nola. And as I said, we are already running out of time, but if you have typed a question in the chat box, we'll definitely get back to you in the communique. And thank you so much for such a great set of questions and discussions. I really enjoyed it. And before we finish today's event, I'm again delighted to invite you again, Nola, to please do share your final comments.
Hi again. I just really want to thank all participants and speakers. So I'm Nolia, I lead the youth team in UNDP. I'm based in New York. It's really a pleasure to be with you all. I want to thank Laurel Babatunde and the team, Katarina and Idil, and Julia from my side, also for putting this together. It's been really wonderful to hear about a very concrete tool that can be indeed used for policy making, for decision making, and for advocacy purposes. And it's been a pleasure to collaborate with Freya and Alice on the Restless Development side. They've been partners in crime of ours on data and youth for quite some time. Prathit, I think the initiative that you talked about really, I think this is the embodiment of the type of leadership we would have liked to see across the board, you know, in the context of the COVID-19 response. As Danielle and Prathit said, I think that it took quite some time for decision makers also to acknowledge the disproportionate impact that the COVID crisis was going to have on children and youth. And I think that now we've come to a stage where we can see it. I think there's still some element of this impact that we are not seeing yet that relate to mental health. And I could see that some people were typing in the chat issues related to depression and to the lack of hope, etc. I think there will be very long-term impacts that we will have to deal with, and that we will have to also embed in qualitative and quantitative reporting and reflections around COVID-19 and SDG implementation. So first of all, thank you very much for the work that you're doing as young people, because you do, again, you express a deep commitment to SDG implementation, you embody leadership and resilience, and you are generally also in a room the only people that are really worried about who is not at the table and who is unheard and who is the most marginalized. And I think that also makes the partnerships with young people really, really special. I think we've heard that young people are interested in playing a role in data collection and analysis and in playing more role in accountability. And that's not a favor that we make to children and youth. It's also a question of rights, as Prathit has mentioned. I think it's also beyond the issue of development effectiveness. We have to invest more in safe spaces for young people, in conducive environments, even for young people to be involved with data collection and involved with policy making. So it means that, of course, we need good technical solutions. And what I like about the Data Future platform is that you're from the get-go really worried about also how to ensure that this is an instrument that can strengthen or expand the opportunities to amplify voices and to make them count. So looking forward also to working further with you as you also evolve into a space for qualitative reporting on perceptions and emotions, as you said, Laurel. I think that's extremely powerful and very much needed. I think assumptions came a number of times as well in the discussions. I think, yes, we need to question our assumptions, conscious or not. And there are always assumptions when it comes to young people. We know about the assumptions about young people being unemployed and potentially being violent. We know the assumptions about hordes of people that are on the move and how that might impact a society. We know the impact, the assumptions related to capabilities or experience that young people may or may not have. So please, also in everything that you do across the board, think about that from the get-go, and think also about how you can make your work related to SDGs always more welcoming and more inclusive of specific groups of young people that may not be at the table. I think indeed the data is power, young people as well, and I hope that we will be able to make this collaboration even more systematic and support you in that endeavor. So again, thank you very much. And on issues related to voice and civic space, I also posted in the chat a report that was recently launched by the Working Group on Protection, which is an interagency space in the UN with the Youth Envoy and OHCHR and UNDP and others, really looking at also the protection of young people, young human rights defenders, whom we know have been specifically targeted by COVID-19, the COVID-19 crisis, but also the COVID-19 related response and measures. So please have a look at that and let us know what you think. And always happy to support connecting you with our country offices and with different partners across the board. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Noella. That was a brilliant final remarks. Laurel, do you have final remarks you want to share before we close the day?
Thank you, Alice. Thank you also, Daniel and Prathit and Noelia, of course. I'll be very brief because I know we're running over time, but really to thank you all for your insights and your participation. I mean, what I take out of this as well too is that this Data for Youth is maybe something that we should try to formalize and keep moving. I would love to reconnect with this group in September, say when we're looking at SDG Moment and other things as well too. And I would also be interested in your feedback. I mean, what's the best way for you to ask questions and get onto this platform? So a webinar is one way you can do it. It gets the discussion going, but I think for you to be able to use this in your day-to-day, maybe we need to have different kinds of sessions, almost like Ask Me Anything, open office hour. You could come and bring a challenge or a couple of ideas and so on, and we could think about better engagement that way as well too. So maybe this Data for Youth is something that we want to continue to nurture alongside the work that we're doing on Data Futures. Last thing I wanted to reflect on, of all the survey questions, the one where you all wrote back, you saw the SDG push, like at 41% more saw this could be where we can see ourselves in 2030, a generation that's defined by SDG push. But there were many that saw both high damage as a very possible version of the future and COVID baseline. And here's what I just wanted to end on for all of us is that it'll be our choices. And so I really liked the way that balance came out because all of those options are what's in front of us. And what makes the difference is not our planning for 2030 or for 2050. It's what we're trying to do with those insights today. It's the action today. It's a bravery that all of you exhibit, probably more than most people, and courage. And we want to put these tools at your disposal so that you can continue to do that and advance that. And I'm just going to pop one last thing in the chat for you to consider, or just maybe you want to mess around with this space. But another thing that our team has opened up is a set of capabilities, leadership capabilities building on systems transformation that's putting you and us and the collective at the center of transformation. And to say, please do, I hope that you feel supported by us. We would love to keep the conversation going, support each other, but this sort of a collective action, it can be data enabled, but it will be driven by courage and by bravery. So please continue to do that. We need you, and we'll do the best we can on our side to support and facilitate and get out of the way where that is a more effective strategy. So thank you all so much.
What a day, what a wonderful reflection. And everyone, thank you so much for everyone for joining us. And remember, if you want to keep talking, we have very few remaining minutes, up to 7 minutes of networking with others who have participated in this wonderful event. And feel free to stay on Zoom for a few minutes. I think it's 5 to 6 minutes to connect and keep this conversation going. But if for those who have to leave us now, thank you again for your contribution and joining. We'll be in touch with our communicator from the event, and I really enjoyed being the facilitator of this event. And I truly believe that young people have to be meaningfully engaged and participate in all the corners of decision making. So thank you all, and thanks for engaging.